world is bracing for Iran's response to those strikes by the US, with the country vowing that war starts right now after 3 nuclear sites were obliterated by President Trump.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
And while the US insists it's not at war with Iran following the military action, Tehran says it will retaliate, adding there won't be any return to diplomacy until such a response has been taken. For more, we're joined by Mike Baker, former CIA Covert Operations Officer, and Dr. Keith Suter here in the Sunrise studio. Great to have you with us. Mike, let's start with you. Iran is warning of everlasting consequences here. Their military says the war starts right now. What does retaliation look like?
Yeah, there's several different scenarios for what it could look like, right? And it all comes down to, does the Iranian regime, do the mullahs, do the IRGC, do they want to remain in power? And that will dictate what their response is. There's a chance that they may, and this is a very outside chance, they may say, okay, enough's enough. Let's sit down at the negotiating table and come up with some type of arrangement. That, again, is sort of on the outside. There's a chance that they'll have a limited, very calculated, strategic response that will be essentially telegraphed, which is similar to what they did in the past during the recent back and forth. And then there's sort of the asymmetric response. Well, they decide that, they will use the remnants of their proxies and perhaps, other assets to strike out in unexpected ways against U.S. targets, Israeli targets, et cetera, which would then lead to a very serious escalation of the problem. Look, so at the end of the day, if anybody says they know what Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, and the IRGC will intend to do, they're blowing smoke up your backside. They don't know. It's all speculation at this point.
OK, Mike, we are hearing that Iran's foreign minister has just landed in Moscow, presumably for a meeting with Putin. Does that mean we're in for a hell of a lot more trouble here?
Well, again, this is speculation, but I don't see the Russians stepping into this. They are stretched thin as it is with their 3-year invasion of Ukraine. If anything, perhaps they will play an asymmetric role again, perhaps through disinformation, propaganda, work on social media to try to influence a narrative. But I would be surprised if they step in with any significant support. They are worried. Look, they lost Syria as an asset in the Middle East. They're very worried about losing Iran as an ally in the area. But I don't think they're in a position at this point to step in with any formidable response.
Okay.
Dr. Keith, to use the words of Donald Trump, is he gambling with World War III here?
No, there won't be World War III. In order for World War III to take place, Russia and China would need to come in on the side of Iran. And they are not going to do that. They may provide some assistance, in terms of cyber warfare, etc., but there will be no direct collision. So there's no risk of World War III. Iran is actually quite isolated. It doesn't have too many friends to come in to back it up. The worry, though, is that we could end up with an enlarged regional conflict in the Middle East, particularly if Iran starts to attack American bases, etc., in the Middle East.
OK, so how does that affect Australia? We have troops, probably hundreds, in the Middle East. Will we be asked to be drawn in? How will it affect us?
I doubt if they're going to get troops deployed. We're talking about a situation where Iran is 1,000 miles, 1,000 kilometres away from Israel. I don't think there's going to be a ground attack. It's not a rerun of Iraq in that sense back in 2003. So there'll be no role for ground troops. If we do have Australian troops in that area, it's probably to help with evacuation. And Australia is very good at evacuating its own citizens.
Mike, we know that potentially those bases that you touched on there in the Middle East, the US bases, also the ships offshore, are potential targets. What's the protocol? What's the understanding that you have that if rockets are launched, what do they do?
Well, look, we've got very good air defense systems for the bases that are existing there. We've got a large base in Qatar. And we've got some personnel in Iraq and elsewhere. And those, are at this point, possibly in the sites. it's more likely that Iran will, again, I think if you had to say, okay, you're a betting man, what are you going to put your money on? It's more likely that they're going to go after sort of a low impact response. And again, they'll likely telegraph it. They may attack a sort of an abandoned facility that we have. With the idea that, yes, because what are they doing? They're really playing to their home team. They're playing to their audience, their population. At this point, the Iranian regime is desperate to try to show that they're still in control. The last thing they want to do is to lose the control over their population. So they've got to do something here, but I think it's going to be fairly low impact.
Mike, as far as retaliation is concerned, will we see terror sympathisers commit terror attacks against the US or their allies over this?
Well, I think if you would ask that question, if this had been happening a year and a half, 2 years ago, then the response would be much different. It would be, yes, we are likely to see this proxy network that they have built over all these years, to try to achieve their objective, which is essentially, as they've said many times, the destruction of Israel. We would see a much different response. But look, the reason why I believe Israel chose this time is because it was a unique opportunity. Over the past year and a half, they have significantly decimated Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, the militias in Iraq and Syria. And I think they felt at this point that they've got this opportunity, along with the fact that the Iranians appeared to be, racing towards their goal of enriching uranium to a weapons-grade level. I think they saw this as an opportunity because they would not get the same response from that proxy network.
Keith, it's almost been 24 hours since these strikes. The first comment we've had has been from Tanya Plibersek, Labor MP, here on Sunrise this morning. Why haven't we heard from Anthony Albanese on this?
I think the Australian government is very divided. I think the Australian government has sympathy for Israel's point of view, but is also aware of all the concerns about Israel's behaviour in Gaza. So the government is keeping a very low profile on this issue, and it certainly doesn't want to get involved in a conflict in the Middle East.
Because it's interesting, actually. We haven't heard, have we, many statements from many big countries around the world. Is this a bit of a sort of gang up against Trump?
No, I think there have been a number of complaints. We're getting it at the moment at the UN Security Council. So we've got countries like Russia and China being very critical of what Donald Trump has done. So, yes, there are a lot of complaints from other countries around the world. And obviously the UN Secretary-General is very worried about the risk of this just eroding still more the whole notion of international law. What
is our ability in terms of a conflict? If we are asked by the US to get involved in this, what does that look like for Australia?
Look, for us to be invited to get involved, the Americans would need to be thinking about troops on the ground, more forces. Donald Trump does not want that. Most of his supporters are saying, you promise not to get involved in any more wars in the Middle East. So they will not want to get involved in an enlarged conflict. I think Trump has said, I've done the heavy lifting. I've got rid of those 3 major nuclear installations. That's it.
Mike, let's go back to you. Just quickly, a number of airlines are now cancelling flights to Dubai and surrounding regions. That is a very popular gateway for Aussies getting to Europe. In your opinion, do you think it's safe to fly through that area?
Well, I think you have to be pragmatic. Look, I mean, people can't stop, or you can't sit in a foxhole. And so they have to take this in terms of a risk assessment. I think, yeah, certainly the risk is higher than it was. Going back to an important point, which you just talked about, which was the idea that perhaps, nations are ganging up on Trump on this. I would argue the other. I would say the nations are ganging up on Iran on this point. You're not hearing from the regional actors, from the Saudis, the Jordanians, the UAE, others, about, oh my God, look, they're attacking Iran, because the regional actors, they won't say it publicly, but they're all saying, yeah, it's about time. Just get on with it, right? You're not getting a lot of pushback. You're not seeing any pushback of any meaning from China. Yes, they're meeting with Russia, but Russia's not going to step into this mess, right? So I think Iran, to the point of your other guest here, is fairly isolated on this. And I think they're going to be surprised at the fact that the regional actors are not racing to support them.
Yeah, we'll continue to follow that reaction across the globe as well. Mike, thank you for your time. Dr. Keith Suter, thank you.
Thank you.
And soon on Sunrise, Foreign Minister Penny Wong will join us live.